Hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the world. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new to my channel, then welcome. My name is Zach Jones, although a lot of you probably already know who I am. Earlier this evening, I showed you some of the skulls in my Natural-Commodities collection, which is like natural things from nature that I have collected. As many of you know, I've been passionate, fascinated, and bordering on obsessed with the natural world ever since I was a boy. Of course, I'm first going to start with some 3D printed models, well, some replicas of the dinosaurs. This one here is a T-Rex. I know it's not as big as a T-Rex, skull really is, but it was a 3D printed model, and of course, one thing that you always see about the T-Rex skull is just how thick and heavily boned it is. But also the teeth. I mean, these are 16 inches long, are thick and serrated like a shark's, so they can cut through flesh and bone. But also the tyrannosaurs have the largest nasal cavities of any dinosaur, and it was also proven in the early 2000s that tyrannosaurs have the largest area of their brains devoted to smell. Of course, they also have forward-facing eyes, which gives them binocular vision, and of course it's quite possible that they could track moving prey, so unlike the Jurassic movies made out to be, I'm pretty sure a T-Rex's vision wasn't purely based on movement. But also, because they had very short arms and couldn't grasp, so with tyrannosaurs it was all about the bite. A T-Rex had probably the strongest bite of any dinosaur, about just over 6 tons of pressure, so its bite force was 10,000 times more powerful than a lion's. Of course, I've also got right here a T-Rex tooth. Of course, the T-Rex tooth, of course, it's very long, but also it's very thick set, and it's serrated front and back, a lot like a shark's. And this was well evolved for crushing through bone and being able to kill prey like Triceratops. Of course, another tooth I've got here is from an Allosaurus. Allosaurus was around in the Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago, so it wouldn't have come across T-Rex, which lived in the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. And Allosaurus teeth were serrated on the front and back, so they were good for ripping through flesh. But unlike many of its carnosaur cousins, the Allosaurus teeth were also very, very thick. Of course, if you look at these side by side, you've got T-Rex teeth, a little bit shorter but stouter and for crushing through bone. And then there's the Allosaurus teeth, which is used primarily for ripping through flesh, and that's mainly down to how the Allosaurus hunted. Of course, I'm going to have to use a T-Rex skull, as basically a metaphor for how a Allosaurus would have killed its prey, because recent research has indicated that Allosaurus's bite was surprisingly weak, as calculations have suggested its bite was less powerful than a lion's, despite being 8 times more massive. So you're all probably wondering how this Jurassic predator hunted and killed. Well, despite the apparent weakness of its bite, Allosaurus did in fact have a deadly killing method, because its skull could withstand force more than 15 times greater than its bite. But also around the back of the skull where the neck muscles joined, those were quite large. And Allosaurus might have used its head like an axe, so it would use its strong neck muscles to drive its top jaw into its prey. And of course, then the victim would die through a combination of shock and blood loss. While it's not pretty or clinical, it was ruthlessly efficient. And of course, another one that I've got is this. It's the killing claw from the Velociraptor. When I was a kid, Velociraptors were my favourite dinosaur. They still are to this day. And of course, in the fossil records, Velociraptors always had this, a 6-inch curved claw on their first toe of each foot, a lot like a dagger. And of course, their teeth were too small to bite at their prey's throat like a lion, so instead they would have used this for killing. And for many decades, scientists were quite puzzled on how Velociraptors used it. And of course, in the Jurassic movies, it was often said that they would use these claws to disembowel their prey, like slicing up the stomach. But recent research has suggested that maybe they used it more for stabbing at their prey, like stabbing at the chest or stabbing into the throat. But of course, no one's entirely sure how they would have used this, but of course, it is certain that they used this claw for killing, but they may have also used it for climbing as well. I mean, that's always going to be a mystery because, well, no one's ever really seen one alive. Now, the next things I'm going to show you are in fact these acorns. Now, acorns are, well, they come from oak trees, and oak trees have always been my favourite tree in Britain. And of course, it can take decades for an oak tree to grow fully. And of course, one of the oldest oak trees we have in the UK is over 900 years old, so it was around long before the Normans invaded. But of course, in Britain, we probably have more ancient oak trees than anywhere else in Europe, so that is quite incredible. And now, the next things I'm going to show you are the 3D printed skulls of the predators that I've been collecting over the last year. The first one is this. This is the skull of a pine marten. Now, pine martens are in the weasel family, and they're native to Britain. And as you can probably see around here, they have very, very ferocious canine teeth and stout cheek teeth called carnassials, and they're what they use for biting into bones. But also they have quite large nasal cavities, so they have a very, very keen sense of smell. And around here is where the neck muscles join the skull, and those are quite large, so they're another thing that a pine marten will use to bring down prey. Of course, this one here, same family but much bigger, is a European badger. Badgers are found across the UK and across much of Britain really, and of course they are the largest weasels in Britain. And of course they not only have very ferocious teeth, I mean, as you can see those canine teeth, they are formidable. And they have a very large nasal cavity, so a very, very keen sense of smell. And of course, while a badger may look harmless, I mean, they can be very, very ferocious. In fact, I really would not advise trying to give one a hug, because if you did, you'd probably end up getting shredded, because there's no doubt if I was to try and hold a badger, it would probably rip me to shreds, and I don't think I would live to tell the tale. Well, I probably would, but I'd probably end up in the hospital. And Another skull, this one is a recent addition to my collection. It's from a big cat. It's from the big cats of the Americas, the puma, which is also known as the cougar, the panther, and the mountain lion. The puma is the largest ranging land carnivore in the Americas. And you can see it has a very broad and blunt skull, so it's very, very muscular. It has a very large nasal cavity, so it's got a very, very keen sense of smell. And of course, it has formidable canine teeth. And of course, the stouter cheek teeth, or carnassials, here at the side of the mouth, those are mostly used for carving up flesh, but the larger canine teeth are used for killing prey, and of course they can take on prey as big as elk, and possibly even juvenile moose. But even so, because the puma may be the same size and weight as a fully grown human, we would be no match for them in a fight. And another skull, this is a dog skull. It's from a wolf. Now, wolves are the largest of the dog family and one of the most widespread land carnivores. Of course, as you can see right here, they have a very large nasal cavity because the wolf has a very, very keen sense of smell. In fact, it's said to be thousands of times more powerful than a human being's, and of course they can pick up the scent of an animal that's old, weak, injured or sick from miles away. Of course, the thing that always catches me about the wolf skull is the teeth. Because there's probably about 60 teeth in here, and there's about 60 to 68 teeth in a fully grown grey wolf skull, whereas there'd only be about 30 or so in a decent sized cat, like a leopard. Of course, these teeth here are the canine teeth. They're very long, and they interlock, so they get once they've got a hold of prey, which could be a deer, an elk, a moose, or a bison, because these long canine teeth, about 1.5 inches in length, could leave a 6-inch gash, which will usually leave a prey animal to bleed to death. And along here are these stouter cheek teeth, or carnassials, and they're what are used for biting into bones. If you ever see a dog getting stuck into a bone, it will quite often bring it round to the side of its mouth and bite away at it. We often use these teeth at the front because they're far too brittle. But also, around here is where the neck muscles join the skull, and those are very, very large, and they can be used by the wolf as it gets its teeth stuck into a kill. It will brace back with its enormous front paws on straight legs and shake the head from side to side to tear out chunks of meat. Now, the next skull is another new addition to my collection. This is from one of the largest ranging land omnivores on the planet. It's a black bear skull. Now, black bears are probably the least choosy of the bears. A lot of the time, much of what they eat throughout the year is roots, berries, plants and moss, but they can become predators because a lot of the time they'll be in dire need of protein to supplement their usual diets. As you can see, they have very formidable canine teeth and quite stout cheek teeth. And of course, like all bears, they have a very large nasal cavity, which means they have a sense of smell that's more than 8,000 times more powerful than humans, and so they can pick up the scent of an easy meal from a mile away or over a kilometre. And now I'm going to show you all the biggest land predator. You're probably thinking that this has got to belong to some kind of dinosaur, but